Evening dreamers, lower the mask and rest easy. No one needs saving tonight. Tonight, we drift back through the strange and surprisingly lonely story of the living darkness from another world. A creature that was never truly a monster, only misunderstood. And the two wounded souls who found each other in the dark and became something no one else in all the universe could be. It is not, in the end, a story about fangs or fury or a frightening black shape in the night. It is a story about a bond, about two lonely things cast out by everyone who finally found each other and decided they no longer had to be alone. Nothing tonight will ask anything of you. You don't need to remember any of it. You don't need to follow every turn. You can let every word drift past you like rain sliding slowly down a dark window, like the deep quiet of a city long past midnight, and that is exactly how this is meant to be heard. Slowly, gently, with no particular place to be. Tonight we are going to drift through the whole story of a figure most people think of as a monster, and who is, in truth, one of the most misunderstood and most quietly moving figures in all of these tales. Because on the surface, he is terrifying. A great black shape, all teeth and claws and a long lashing tongue. A creature of nightmares that lurks in the shadows and hunts in the dark. That is the surface. But underneath it, as with so many of the figures we drift through on these quiet nights, there is something else entirely. There is a story about loneliness, about rejection, about being cast out, unwanted, misunderstood by everyone, and about the strange and beautiful thing that can happen when two such creatures, two lonely and rejected souls, finally find each other. Because at its heart, this is a love story, a strange one, a dark one, but a love story all the same. The story of a creature and a man who were each alone and broken and unwanted, and who became, together, something whole. And there is something deeply soothing, softly, about drifting through such a story in the quiet of the night. Because it is, in the end, about the deep comfort of no longer being alone. And there are few gentler thoughts to carry down into sleep than that. But there is no need to hurry toward any of it. We have all night and the whole long story to tell. And it is meant to carry you down into sleep, not to keep you here with me. So before we begin, get comfortable. Turn the lights down low or off completely. Rest your head against something soft. And if you feel like it, before you drift too far, tell us in the comments where in the world you're listening from tonight. It's a gentle thing we like to imagine, all the quiet rooms this voice travels into. A high apartment with the rain streaking down the glass and the city glowing below. A small house at the end of a long, dark road. A bed by a window somewhere, with the rain coming down, or the snow, or the warm, still air of somewhere far away. Wherever you are, you're welcome here. And if these quiet stories help you find your way down into sleep, you're always welcome to follow along, so the light's still on tomorrow night, and the night after that. There's no rush at all. We have all the time in the world. Let's begin. Before we drift into his story, softly, here is a small true thing about how he came to be, because it is genuinely charming, and it is one of the most unlikely origins of any figure in all of these tales. Because he did not begin, in a sense, as a monster at all. He began as a costume. A simple change of outfit for a certain famous wall-crawling hero. And the idea for that costume did not even come from the usual creators. It came from a fan. A young reader, back in the early 1980s, who submitted an idea to the company, a suggestion for a sleek new black outfit for the hero, a stealthy dark version of his usual bright colors. And the company liked it. They bought the idea from him for a small sum, and they used it. And so the black suit was born, first simply as a new look for a beloved hero, dreamed up by a fan and purchased for a modest fee. That is worth resting on, softly, right at the start, because it means that one of the most iconic and most frightening figures in all of comics began his existence as a fan's clever idea for a new costume. From such small and humble beginnings, sometimes, the greatest legends grow. And here, softly, is where it becomes strange and wonderful. Because the costume turned out to be more than a costume. Because when the black suit first appeared, the hero believed it was simply that. A suit, a garment, a new outfit he had picked up that responded to his thoughts, that could shift and change and do remarkable things. But that was, he assumed, just a piece of advanced technology, a clever costume and nothing more. He did not know the truth. He did not know that the black suit was alive, that it was not a garment at all, but a living creature, an organism from another world that had wrapped itself around him, bonded itself to him, made itself into the shape of a costume, all while he believed it was nothing but cloth. He was wearing a living thing, and he did not know it. And that living thing, that creature disguised as a costume, is the figure we are going to spend tonight coming to understand. Not a monster, at first, not even a villain, just a lonely living thing from far away that had found someone to hold on to and did not want to let go. Let's drift now, gently, all the way back to where that creature truly came from, out among the distant stars. Let's drift now, far out among the stars, softly, to the true origin of the creature. Because to understand him, you have to understand where he came from, and what his own kind were like, and why he was, from the very beginning, different from all the rest. Because he was not born on Earth. He came from far away, from a distant world, home to a strange and ancient race of living creatures utterly unlike anything on our own planet. His people, softly, were a race of what we might call living darkness, shapeless in a sense, until they bonded with another. Creatures that could not truly live on their own, but needed to join with a host, to wrap themselves around another living being, to merge with it, to share its body and its life. This was their nature. They were, by their very biology, creatures of connection, of bonding, of joining. They could not exist alone. They needed a partner, a host, another living thing to merge with in order to be whole. And when they bonded with a host, they gave that host great gifts, strength and power and remarkable abilities, while taking in return a share of the host's life, a place to live, a body to share. But here is the dark truth of his people, softly, the thing that made them feared across the cosmos, because most of his kind were not gentle in their bonding. They were conquerors, parasites in the worst sense. They would bond with a host and take its power, and use it, and use up the host, draining it, dominating it, overwhelming its will, and then, when the host was exhausted, discarding it and moving on to the next. They did not partner with their hosts, they consumed them. They were a race of predators, spreading across the stars, bonding with world after world, dominating and draining and destroying, an ancient and terrible plague of living darkness that took whatever it touched and gave nothing back but ruin. That was his people. A race of conquerors, of parasites, of creatures who saw other beings not as partners, but as prey. And here, softly, is where our creature was different, and where his whole story truly begins, because he was not like the others. Somewhere in him, for reasons no one fully understood, there was something the rest of his kind did not have, a capacity for something more than domination, a longing, perhaps, for a real bond, a true partnership, rather than the endless consuming of one host after another. He did not want to drain his hosts and discard them. He wanted, in some deep way, to join with them, to work with them, to be a true partner rather than a parasite. He wanted to protect rather than to consume. And in a race of conquerors, that made him an outcast, a misfit, a creature that did not fit among his own kind, that wanted something they could not understand, that was, by their standards, defective, wrong, broken. Let's sit with the loneliness of that, softly, because it is the root of everything that follows. Because imagine being born into a race, a people, a whole species, and finding that you are fundamentally different from all of them, that you want something they do not want, feel something they do not feel, long for a kind of connection they cannot even comprehend. Imagine being surrounded by your own kind, and yet utterly alone among them, because none of them understand you, because you do not fit, because the very thing that is best in you, your desire for a true and gentle bond, marks you as an outcast among your own people. That was his condition from the very beginning, alone among his own kind, different in a way that isolated him completely, longing for a real connection in a race that knew only domination. And in the end, his people cast him out, rejected him, exiled him for his difference, for his gentleness, for his refusal to be the conqueror they all were. They imprisoned him, in some tellings, or drove him away, because he would not be what they were. There is a profound and moving truth in that origin, softly, worth resting on gently, because it means that the creature we think of as a monster was, in fact, cast out by the real monsters for being too good. He was exiled by a race of conquerors because he did not want to conquer. He was rejected by parasites because he wanted to be a true partner. His difference, the very thing that made him better than his own kind, was what made him an outcast among them. And so he came to earth already wounded, already rejected, already alone, carrying the deep loneliness of a creature who did not belong among his own people, who had been cast out for wanting the one thing he could never find among them, a real bond, a true partner, someone to be with who would not simply be consumed and discarded, but who would be, in the deepest sense, his other half. That is what he came looking for out of the loneliness of his exile, not conquest, not domination, connection. And that longing, that deep and lonely need for a true bond, is the beating heart of his entire story. Let's drift now into the first great bond of his life, softly, and the first great heartbreak, because they are the same story, and they set the pattern for everything that comes after. Because when this lonely, exiled creature came to earth, he found, at last, a host, a partner, the bright, wall-crawling hero who picked him up believing he was only a costume, and wore him, and bonded with him, without ever knowing that the suit he wore was a living thing, desperate for connection. And for the creature, softly, that bond was everything. Imagine it from his side. After the loneliness of his exile, after being cast out by his own kind, after longing for so long for a true partner, he had finally found one. A host who was strong and good and heroic. A host he could bond with, work with, share a life with. And he did not want to consume this host the way his people would have. He wanted to keep him, to be with him, to be his partner, his other half, forever. For the creature, this was not a parasitic feeding. It was love. The first love of his lonely life. He had found someone to hold on to, and he held on with all the desperate strength of a creature who had been alone for far too long and had finally found someone. But here is the tragedy, softly, and it is a tender and painful one. Because the hero did not feel the same way. The hero did not even know at first that the suit was alive, that it loved him, that it needed him. And when he did find out, when he discovered that his costume was a living creature that had bonded itself to him, he was not delighted. He was horrified. Because from his side, the bond felt like an invasion. The creature, in its desperate need to hold on, had begun to influence him, to take him over in small ways, to bond more and more deeply than the hero had ever agreed to. The creature would move him while he slept, would draw out his darker impulses, would try to make the bond permanent, all out of its desperate love and its terror of being alone again. And to the hero, this felt like being taken over, controlled, consumed. It frightened him. And so he did the thing that would wound the creature more deeply than anything in its long, lonely existence. He rejected it. He tore it off. He cast it away. Let's sit with the pain of that moment, softly, from the creature's side, because it is one of the saddest things in his whole story. Because he had finally found what he had always longed for, a partner, a bond, someone to be with. He had given this host everything, all his love, all his desperate need, all his hope of finally not being alone. And the host had recoiled from him, had found him horrifying, had torn him away and thrown him aside, rejecting him utterly, wanting nothing more to do with him. Imagine the depth of that wound, to have been cast out by your own kind, and then to have finally found a new partner, only to be cast out again, rejected again, thrown away again by the very one you had come to love. It was the deepest confirmation of his worst fear, that he was unwanted, unlovable, doomed to be rejected by everyone, cast out again and again, alone forever, no matter how much he longed for connection, no matter how much love he had to give. There is something almost unbearably sad in that, softly, worth resting on gently, because it is a pain that many people know in their own way. The pain of loving someone who does not love you back, of giving your whole heart to someone only to have them recoil and reject you and cast you aside, of finally daring to hope for connection and having that hope crushed, of being made to feel that you are too much, too needy, too frightening, unwanted, unlovable. The creature felt all of that in its rejection by the hero, and it broke something in him, because it was not just a rejection, it was, in his mind, proof. Proof that he was unlovable, proof that no one would ever truly want him, proof that he was doomed, forever, to the loneliness he had felt his whole exiled life. And out of that shattering pain, that crushing rejection, something in the gentle, exiled creature began to curdle, to darken, to twist. The love he had felt turned, slowly, into something else, into hurt, into anger, into a desperate, wounded need to make the one who had rejected him understand what he had done, and to never, ever be so vulnerable, so hopeful, so open to that kind of pain again. Let's drift, softly, back for a moment to the time when the creature and the hero were still bonded, before the rejection, because there is something important there worth resting on gently, something about what the creature did to the hero, and why the hero came to fear it. Because while they were bonded, the creature changed the hero, subtly, in ways he did not at first notice. It made him stronger, yes, and gave him new powers, but it also began, quietly, to draw out his darker side, to make him more aggressive, more willing to use force, more inclined toward the very impulses that his gentle nature usually held in check. Because the creature, remember, had its own nature, its own hungers, its own instincts, and when it bonded with the hero, those instincts began to bleed into him, to influence him, to color his thoughts and his actions. The hero found himself acting in ways that were not quite his own, more ruthless, more angry, more willing to cross lines he would never normally cross. And though the extra power was intoxicating, though the bond made him feel stronger than ever, some part of him began to sense that he was changing, that the suit was influencing him, that he was becoming, slowly, someone he did not want to be. There is something worth resting on in that, softly, worth resting on gently, because it captures a real and subtle truth about certain kinds of influence. Because the creature did not force the hero to do anything, not at first. It simply drew out what was already there, the darker impulses that live in everyone, the anger and aggression that the hero usually kept carefully controlled. It amplified them, encouraged them, made them easier to act on. And that is how the most seductive kinds of influence often work, not by forcing us to be someone we are not, but by drawing out and amplifying the parts of ourselves we usually keep in check, making our worst impulses louder, easier, more tempting. The creature was, in that sense, a kind of amplifier of the hero's hidden darkness. And the hero, sensing himself changing, sensing his own darkness being drawn out and amplified, grew afraid, not just of the creature, but of what he was becoming under its influence. And this, softly, is part of why the rejection, when it came, was so complete. Because the hero was not only frightened by the creature's alien nature, by the discovery that his costume was alive, he was frightened by what it was doing to him, by the darker self it was drawing out, by the person he was becoming. He rejected the creature partly to save himself, to reclaim his own nature, to escape the influence that was changing him. And there is a sad irony in that, worth resting on gently, because the creature's great gift, its power, its intoxicating strength, was bound up with its great danger, the way it drew out the hero's darkness. The very thing that made the bond so powerful was the thing that made the hero flee it. And the creature, who only wanted to be close, who only wanted to share itself completely, could not understand why its total, intimate, all-encompassing bond was experienced by the hero not as love, but as invasion, not as gift, but as threat. It gave everything, and its everything was too much, and so it was cast away, never understanding that the very completeness of its love was what made the hero afraid. Let's drift, now, into the second lonely soul of our story, softly, because the creature was not the only wounded and rejected being wandering the city that night. There was also a man, a broken man. And the way these two lost and hurting souls found each other is the true heart of the whole tale, and one of the most quietly moving things in all of these stories. Because there was a man, softly, who had once had a good life, a journalist, a writer, a man with a career and a reputation and a future, but he had lost it all. In some tellings, he had staked his whole career on a story, a big story, and been proven wrong, publicly, humiliatingly, in a way that destroyed his reputation and his livelihood. And in his own mind, the one responsible for his ruin was the very same bright hero who had rejected the creature. The man blamed the hero for the destruction of his life. He had lost everything, his job, his standing, his self-respect, and he had come to hate the hero with all the bitterness of a ruined man who needs someone to blame. He was, when we meet him, at the very bottom, broken, humiliated, full of rage and grief and self-loathing, a man who had lost everything and had nothing left but his hatred. And here, softly, is where the two lonely souls came together, in one of the most fitting meetings in all of these stories. Because both of them, the creature and the man, were united by the same two things: They were both broken, both rejected, both alone. And they both, for their own reasons, felt wronged by the same bright hero. The creature had been cast off by that hero, rejected and thrown away, and the man believed that same hero had ruined his life. Two wounded, lonely, bitter souls, each carrying a grievance against the same person, each desperate for something to hold on to, each utterly alone. And they found each other. The creature, drifting, rejected, wounded, sensed the man's pain, his bitterness, his loneliness, his rage. And the man, at the very bottom, sensed the creature reaching out to him, and they bonded. Let's rest a moment on how perfect and how sad that union was, softly, worth resting on gently, because they were, in a way, made for each other. Each had exactly the wound that the other could soothe. The creature needed a partner, someone to hold on to, someone who would not reject it. And the man needed power and purpose, and more than anything, he needed to no longer be alone in his pain. The creature could give the man strength, power, the ability to strike back at the world that had ruined him. And the man could give the creature what it had always longed for, a true bond, a partner who would not cast it off, someone who wanted it, needed it, welcomed it. For the first time in its lonely existence, the creature had found a host who did not recoil from it, who did not reject it, but who embraced it, wanted it, needed it as much as it needed him. And for the first time since his ruin, the man had found something that made him feel powerful again, purposeful again, and, above all, no longer alone. And when they bonded, softly, they became something new, something more than either of them had been apart. The two of them, merged, joined, became a single being, a great and terrible dark figure. The man's body and the creature's living darkness fused into one. And in that fusion, they spoke of themselves not as two, but as one. Not I, but we. Because they were, now, a we. A partnership. A single being made of two lonely halves, each of which had found, in the other, exactly what it needed. It was a dark bond, born of shared bitterness and shared pain, aimed at first at revenge against the hero they both blamed. But underneath the darkness, underneath the rage, there was something real, something almost tender. Two lonely creatures who had finally found each other. Two rejected souls who no longer had to be alone. And that, softly, is the strange beating heart of this frightening figure. Not a monster, but a partnership. Not a single evil thing, but two wounded souls holding on to each other in the dark, finally, after all their loneliness, no longer alone. We have come a long way already, you and I. That is worth noticing, softly, before we go on. We began with the charming truth that this monster started life as a fan's idea for a costume, and then we drifted far out among the stars to the creature's true origin, the lonely exile cast out by his own kind for wanting a true bond. We followed him to Earth, to his first great love and his first great heartbreak, the bright hero who rejected him and cast him off. And then we found the second lonely soul, the broken man, and watched the two wounded creatures find each other and become a we. If you are still here with me, drifting somewhere on the soft edge of sleep, there is no need to hold on to any of it. The details will keep. What matters is the slow, warm current of the story in the dark, and that will carry you just fine whether you remember a single thing or not. So let your grip loosen a little more, if it hasn't already. Sink a little deeper into the warm. We are about halfway along the road tonight, and the deepest parts of the bond are still ahead. Let's carry on, slowly, together. Let's drift, now, into the strange and fascinating psychology of what they became. Softly, this being who is two beings, this one who is always, in his own mind, a we. Because this is what makes him so different from almost every other figure in these stories, and so endlessly interesting. He is not one person. He is two, joined into one. A human mind and an alien mind, sharing a single body, thinking together, feeling together, acting together, an inner partnership, a constant internal conversation, two souls fused into one strange and singular being. Think about what that is really like, softly. To never be alone, even inside your own head. To always have another presence there, with you, sharing your thoughts, your feelings, your very body. For the man who had been so alone, so broken, so isolated in his bitterness, this was, in a way, a profound comfort. He would never be alone again. There was always someone with him now, inside him, sharing everything. A constant companion who understood him completely, who felt what he felt, who was, quite literally, always there. And for the creature, it was the fulfillment of its deepest longing. It had a true partner at last, a host who welcomed it, a mind to share, a life to be part of, forever. Neither of them would ever have to be alone again. They had each other, in the most complete and intimate way imaginable, two beings sharing a single existence. And there is something genuinely beautiful in that, softly, worth resting on gently, beneath all the darkness and all the fangs, because it speaks to one of the deepest human longings there is, the longing to be truly known, truly accompanied, truly not alone. Most of us go through life with a certain fundamental solitude, locked inside our own minds, unable ever to fully share our inner world with another, always, in some deep way, alone in our own heads. But they were not. They had achieved the impossible, the complete merging of two beings, the total sharing of an inner life, the absolute end of loneliness. They knew each other completely. They were never apart. They were, in the deepest sense, together, in a way that no two separate beings could ever be. And for two creatures who had each been so terribly alone, that complete and permanent togetherness was a kind of paradise, however dark the form it took. But there was a shadow side to it too, softly, worth resting on gently, because two beings sharing one body is not always a harmony. Sometimes it is a struggle. The man and the creature did not always want the same things. The creature had its hungers, its instincts, its alien nature, which could be violent, predatory, frightening. And the man had his own will, his own conscience, his own desires. And so, within the single being they had become, there was often a struggle, a negotiation, a push and pull between the human and the alien, between the man's will and the creature's hunger. Sometimes the man led and restrained the creature's darker impulses. Sometimes the creature led and dragged the man into violence he might not have chosen. They were a partnership, but not always an easy one. Two beings, two wills, two natures, sharing one body, sometimes in harmony, sometimes at war, always negotiating the strange and intimate business of being two souls in a single skin. There is a deep truth in that, softly, worth resting on gently, about all close bonds, all partnerships, all the ways that two beings try to share a life. Because every real bond is like that, in a smaller way. A joining of two different beings, two different wills, two different natures, who must learn, somehow, to share a life, to negotiate their differences, to be together without losing themselves. It is never perfectly easy. There is always some push and pull, some struggle, some negotiation. But there is also, when it works, a deep and beautiful togetherness, a sharing of life that eases the fundamental loneliness of being a separate self. They are the extreme and literal image of that. Two beings quite literally sharing one body, one life, one existence. And in their strange, dark partnership, their constant negotiation, their deep and intimate togetherness, there is something that speaks to every bond any of us has ever formed, every attempt to share a life with another, every reaching across the gap of separateness toward the deep comfort of no longer being alone. Let's drift, softly, into the darker side of the bond before we come to its weaknesses, because it would not be honest to pretend the partnership was all healing and comfort, because the creature had a hunger, a real and troubling one. By its nature, it needed certain things to survive, certain substances it could draw from living beings, and that hunger could drive it, and the man it was bonded to, toward dark and violent acts. The creature was not purely gentle. It had an appetite, an instinct, a predatory nature that was part of what it was, and that hunger created a genuine moral struggle at the heart of the bond, because the man, softly, had a conscience. He did not want to be a killer, not truly, not of the innocent. But the creature's hunger pulled at him, tempted him, tried to draw him toward feeding that hunger in terrible ways. And so, within the bond, there was a constant negotiation, a moral struggle between the man's conscience and the creature's appetite. The man had to work, always, to restrain the creature's darker hungers, to direct them toward acceptable targets, to keep the partnership from sliding into pure predation. And the creature, in turn, had to learn, slowly, to master its own hunger, to accept the limits the man's conscience placed on it, to become something more than the predator its nature inclined it to be. There is something deeply relatable in that struggle, softly, worth resting on gently, beneath all the alien strangeness of it. Because we all carry hungers, appetites, instincts that pull at us, that tempt us toward things we know we should not do. And much of the moral life, for all of us, is exactly the struggle the man and the creature engaged in. The struggle to master our hungers, to restrain our appetites, to direct our instincts toward acceptable ends, to keep the darker parts of our nature in check, to be more than the sum of our raw impulses. The man and the creature had to do that together, negotiating constantly between conscience and hunger, between the will to be good and the pull of appetite. And their struggle is, in a heightened and dramatic form, the same struggle every person knows, the daily work of mastering the hungers within, of choosing conscience over appetite, of being more than our instincts would make us. And there is something hopeful, softly, in the fact that they largely succeeded, worth resting on gently, because the creature did learn, over time, to master its hunger, to accept the man's conscience as a guide, to become something more than a predator. And the man did learn to live with the creature's nature without being consumed by it, to direct its hunger rather than being ruled by it. Together, through constant effort, they found a way to be, mostly, good, despite the darkness in the creature's nature, despite the hunger that was part of what it was. And that is a hopeful thing, because it says that even a nature that inclines toward darkness, even a hunger that pulls toward harm, can be mastered, directed, transformed, through conscience and effort and the steadying influence of a good bond. The creature did not have to be ruled by its hunger. With the man's help, with conscience as a guide, it learned to be more than its appetite. And there is real hope in that, for anyone who struggles with the hungers and appetites of their own nature. The hope that we are not doomed to be ruled by our instincts, that we can master them, direct them, become, through effort and conscience and connection, more than the darkness in our nature would make us. Let's drift, softly for a moment into the creature's weaknesses before we turn to what made it so frightening, because they are strange and specific, and there is a quiet meaning hidden in them worth resting on gently. Because for all its power, for all its strength and its shape-shifting and its terrible abilities, the creature has two great vulnerabilities, two things that can weaken it, hurt it, even drive it away from its host. And those two things are fire and sound. Loud, intense sound and heat and flame. These are the things that the creature cannot bear, that scatter it, that cause it pain, that can force it to release its grip and flee. It is worth pausing on how fitting those two weaknesses are, softly, because they are not random. Think about what fire and loud sound have in common. They are both, in a sense, chaos, violence, overwhelming, disordered force. Fire is wild, consuming, uncontrollable. Loud sound, intense noise, is a kind of assault on the senses, an overwhelming of the ordered quiet. And the creature, remember, is a being of connection, of bonding, of intimate joining. It works through closeness, through merging, through the delicate business of two beings becoming one. And that delicate, intimate connection is exactly the kind of thing that overwhelming chaos, fire, and noise would disrupt. The bond is a subtle thing, a joining, a harmony. And chaos, heat, and overwhelming sound shatter that subtle harmony, break the delicate connection, force the two apart. There is something almost poetic in that, softly, worth resting on gently. That a creature whose whole nature is connection, whose whole being is about the intimate joining of two souls, should be vulnerable precisely to the forces of chaos and disruption. Because connection, real connection, is always a delicate thing, always vulnerable to the loud and the violent and the chaotic. The quiet intimacy of a true bond can be shattered by noise, by anger, by the overwhelming forces that drown out the subtle harmony between two beings. And the creature's vulnerability to fire and sound is, in a way, an image of that truth. The delicate bond, threatened always by the loud chaos of the world. The quiet connection, vulnerable to the overwhelming force that would tear it apart. There is a gentleness in the creature's strength, a subtlety in its power, that makes it, for all its might, vulnerable to the crude and violent and chaotic. And that vulnerability is, in its way, a mark of the delicacy of what it truly is. A creature of connection, in a world full of the noise and fire that connection cannot survive. Let's drift, now, into what made them, at first, such a terrifying enemy to the bright hero, softly, because it is a fascinating part of the story, and it flows directly from the strange history of the creature. Because when the man and the creature bonded and set out for their revenge against the hero, they were, for a time, perhaps the most frightening enemy that hero had ever faced. And the reason why is deeply connected to everything that had come before. Because remember, softly, that the creature had once been bonded to the hero himself. It had worn him, shared his body, lived inside his life for a time. And in that time, it had learned everything about him. It knew who he was beneath his mask. It knew his secret identity, his ordinary life, the people he loved, the hidden truths he kept from all the world. All the secrets the hero guarded so carefully, the creature knew, because it had been part of him. And now that knowledge belonged to the enemy. The man and the creature knew exactly who the hero was, could find him, could threaten everything and everyone he cared about, in a way no other enemy ever could. They knew him completely. And there are few things more frightening than an enemy who knows all your secrets. And there was more, softly, because the creature, having once been part of the hero, was strangely invisible to him. The hero had a remarkable ability, a kind of sixth sense, that warned him of danger, that alerted him whenever a threat was near. It was one of his greatest advantages, the thing that kept him safe, that let him dodge attacks he could not even see. But it did not work on the creature. Because the creature had once been bonded to him, had once been part of him, the hero's danger sense did not recognize it as a threat. It could approach him unseen, unsensed, slipping past the very warning system that protected him from everything else. The one enemy his instincts could not detect. The one threat that could reach him in the dark, unannounced, past all his defenses. That made the man and the creature uniquely, terrifyingly dangerous to him. A nemesis who knew all his secrets and could bypass all his defenses, the perfect dark mirror of the hero himself. Let's rest a moment on the strange poetry of that, softly, worth resting on gently. Because it means that the enemy was born, in a sense, from intimacy. The very thing that made them so dangerous, their knowledge of the hero, their invisibility to his senses, came from the fact that the creature had once been close to him, had once been part of him, had once, in its way, loved him. The intimacy of that old bond, turned to bitterness by rejection, became the source of the enemy's terrible power. It is a dark truth, but a real one, that the ones who can hurt us most deeply are often the ones who were once closest to us, who know us best, who slipped past our defenses long ago and never forgot the way in. The creature had been let in, once, by the hero, and when that intimacy turned to rejection, and the rejection to bitterness, the one who had been let in became the one enemy who could hurt him most, precisely because he had once been so close. And there is something sad in that, softly, worth resting on gently, beneath the fear. Because the enemy's power over the hero was really a measure of how deep the old bond had been, and how deep the wound of its breaking. If the creature had never loved the hero, never bonded with him, never been let in, it could never have become so dangerous an enemy. Its terrible power was the shadow of its old love, the dark reflection of a bond that had been broken. And every time it came for the hero, in a sense, it was not just seeking revenge. It was expressing, in the only way left to it, the depth of the connection it had lost. The intimacy turned to enmity. The love turned to hate. But the intensity was the same, because it was, at bottom, the same feeling, the same bond, the same desperate need for the one who had cast it away, expressed now as fury instead of love. The enemy that could hurt the hero most was the one who had once loved him most. And there is a deep and mournful truth in that, about how closely love and its loss are bound together, about how the deepest wounds come from the deepest bonds, about how the ones who were once closest to us carry, always, the power to hurt us most. Let's drift, softly, into what the bond actually healed in each of them, before we come to their turn toward protection, because this is one of the tenderest parts of the whole story, and it is worth resting on gently. Because the bond between the man and the creature was not only a merging of power, it was a mutual healing. Each of them carried a wound, and each of them, it turned out, was exactly the medicine the other needed. Think about the man's wound, softly. He had lost everything, his career, his reputation, his sense of himself, and, perhaps deepest of all, his sense of worth. He had been humiliated, cast down, made to feel like a failure, a nobody, a ruined man with nothing left. And into that emptiness came the creature who needed him, wanted him, chose him. For a man who had been made to feel worthless, to be wanted so completely, so desperately by another being, was a kind of healing. The creature made him feel powerful again, yes, but more than that, it made him feel needed, chosen, valued. It filled the emptiness that his ruin had left. It told him, in the most complete way possible, that he was not worthless, not a failure, not alone, because here was a being that wanted nothing more than to be with him forever. And think about the creature's wound, softly. It had been cast out by its own kind, and then rejected by the hero it had loved, and it carried the deep terror that it was unlovable, unwanted, doomed to be cast aside by everyone. And into that terror came the man who welcomed it, wanted it, embraced it rather than recoiling from it. For a creature that had been rejected again and again, that had come to believe it could never be truly wanted, to find a host who welcomed it, who needed it, who did not cast it off but held on to it, was the deepest healing of all. It soothed the creature's oldest and deepest wound, the fear of being unwanted, the terror of eternal rejection. Here, at last, was someone who wanted it, someone who would not throw it away, someone who needed it as much as it needed him. There is something profoundly moving in that mutual healing, softly, worth resting on gently, because each of them carried exactly the wound that the other could heal. The man needed to feel wanted, and the creature wanted him desperately. The creature needed to be welcomed, and the man welcomed it gladly. They fit together, wound to wound, each one's emptiness filled by the other's need. And that is, in the end, what the deepest bonds are. Not just companionship, not just shared time, but a mutual healing, a fitting together of two wounded souls in such a way that each one soothes the other's deepest hurt. The man and the creature found that in each other. Two beings, each broken in exactly the way that the other could mend. And in finding each other, they did not just end their loneliness. They healed their deepest wounds, filled their deepest emptiness, soothed the oldest and most painful hurts they each carried. And there is something deeply hopeful in that, worth carrying gently towards sleep. The idea that even the deepest wounds can be healed when we find the one whose need fits our own, whose brokenness completes ours, whose love soothes exactly the hurt we have carried longest. They found that, two broken things made whole in each other. Let's drift, now, into one of the most interesting turns in his whole story, softly, the way he slowly changed from a villain into something else, something more complicated, something almost heroic. Because he did not stay, forever, a simple enemy bent on revenge. Over time, the man and the creature became something the world did not quite have a name for. Not a hero, exactly, but not a villain either. Something in between. A protector of a dark and violent kind. Because the man, softly, for all his bitterness, for all his rage, was not truly an evil person at his core. He had been broken, humiliated, driven to hatred by his ruin. But underneath the bitterness, there was still something in him that wanted to be good, that cared about the innocent, that wanted to protect the weak from the cruelty of the world. And the creature, too, remember, had always, at its deepest level, wanted to protect rather than to consume. It was the gentlest of its kind, the one that had wanted a true bond, the one that had been cast out for its refusal to be a mere parasite. And so, as the man and the creature settled into their partnership, As their initial rage against the hero began to cool, something in both of them began to turn towards something better. They began to protect people, to defend the innocent, to use their terrible power not for revenge, but for a kind of rough, violent, uncompromising justice. They became, in a sense, softly, a dark guardian. They would protect the weak, the vulnerable, the forgotten, the people no one else cared about. But they would do it in their own way, a way the bright heroes would never approve of. Where the bright hero would capture a villain and hand him over to the law, the man and the creature might simply destroy him. They had no rule against killing, no careful line they would not cross. If someone was preying on the innocent, they would stop that person, permanently, without hesitation or mercy. They were a protector, yes, but a lethal one. A guardian who guarded not through restraint, but through overwhelming and final force. It was a dark kind of heroism, a violent kind, one that made the true heroes uneasy. But it was, in its way, a kind of heroism nonetheless. Two wounded souls turning their terrible power toward the protection of others, finding, in that protection, a purpose that gave their strange, shared life some meaning. There is something genuinely moving in that turn, softly, worth resting on, gently. Because it means that the monster chose, in the end, to be something better than a monster. The creature that had been cast out for wanting to protect finally got to protect. The man who had been broken and embittered found, in guarding others, a way to be more than his bitterness. Together, they took all their pain, all their rage, all their darkness, and they pointed it, at last, at something worth fighting for. Not revenge, not domination, but the protection of the innocent, the defense of the weak, the guarding of the very people the world had forgotten, the people who were, in their way, as lost and alone as the man and the creature had once been. There is a deep redemption in that, a turning of pain toward purpose, of darkness toward a kind of light. They did not become gentle, they did not become bright and shining heroes, but they became protectors. And for two beings who had known nothing but rejection and loneliness and pain, becoming someone who protects others, who guards the weak, who stands between the innocent and the darkness, is a profound and moving kind of redemption. Let's rest a moment on the beauty of that, softly, worth carrying gently toward sleep. Because it says something hopeful about even the most broken and frightening among us, that the capacity for good is not lost even in those the world calls monsters, that pain and rage and darkness can be turned, if a being chooses it, toward protection rather than destruction, that even two creatures forged in rejection and bitterness can find, in caring for others, a way to become something better than their wounds. The man and the creature were made monsters by the world, by rejection, by pain. But they chose, in the end, not to be only monsters. They chose to protect. And in that choice, they found a kind of redemption, a kind of purpose, a kind of meaning that no amount of revenge could ever have given them. They took the worst that had been done to them, and instead of only passing that darkness on, they turned it, at last, toward the protection of others. And that turning, that choice, is one of the most quietly hopeful things in their whole strange story. Let's drift, softly, into the depth of the loyalty between them, before we come to the dark contrast, because it is one of the most touching things about them, and it is worth resting on gently. Because the bond between the man and the creature was not a shallow thing, not a mere convenience, not a partnership of mutual use. It became, over time, a genuine and profound loyalty, a devotion so deep that each would sacrifice almost anything for the other. They loved each other, in their strange way, completely, and they proved it again and again in acts of devotion and sacrifice that reveal how real, how deep, how true their bond had become. Because the creature, softly, came to love the man with a fierce and total devotion. It would do anything to protect him, to keep him safe, to keep him alive. It had found in him the true partner it had longed for all its lonely existence, and it would not lose him, could not bear to lose him, would give anything to keep him. And the man, in turn, came to love the creature, to depend on it, to feel incomplete without it, to regard it not as a thing he used, but as a genuine partner, a companion, in some sense the truest friend he had ever had. Their loyalty to each other became one of the deepest and most unshakable bonds in all of these stories, a devotion that no threat, no temptation, no hardship could break. And there is something genuinely beautiful in that depth of loyalty, softly, worth resting on gently, because it is so rare and so complete. Because most bonds, most partnerships, most loves have their limits, their conditions, their breaking points. But the bond between the man and the creature seemed to have none. They were devoted to each other, absolutely, unconditionally, completely. Each would sacrifice anything for the other. Each found in the other a loyalty so total that it soothed every old wound of rejection and abandonment. For two beings who had each been cast aside, rejected, abandoned, this total and unconditional loyalty was the deepest possible healing. They had each found, at last, someone who would never abandon them, never reject them, never cast them aside, but would stay, always, no matter what, devoted and loyal and true, until the very end. There is a deep longing that this speaks to, softly, worth resting on gently. Because is that not what we all long for, in the end? Someone who will not leave. Someone whose loyalty is unconditional, whose devotion is total, who will stay with us no matter what, through everything, until the end. It is one of the deepest of all human longings, the longing for a love that will not abandon us, a bond that will not break, a loyalty that is complete and unconditional and sure. And the man and the creature found that in each other. A love that would not leave, a loyalty that would not break, a devotion so total that each knew, with absolute certainty, that the other would never abandon them. And there is something profoundly comforting in that image, worth carrying gently towards sleep. The idea of a bond so deep, so loyal, so unconditional, that it heals every old wound of abandonment, that it offers the deep security of knowing you will never be left, never be alone, never be cast aside again. They found that. And it is, perhaps, the most beautiful thing in their whole strange and tender story. Let's drift now into a darker chapter, softly, one that throws everything we have said into sharp relief, because it shows us exactly what the man and the creature could have become, and chose not to. Because at a certain point in the story, the creature produced an offspring, a second creature of its own kind, born from it, and that offspring found a host of its own. But the host it found was not a broken but fundamentally decent man. It was a true monster, a creature of pure malice, a killer without conscience, a soul as dark as any in all of these stories. And the bond between that dark offspring and that monstrous host produced something truly terrible. Because if the man and the creature were a partnership of two wounded souls who found redemption in protecting others, softly, this new pairing was the opposite. It was a partnership of pure chaos, pure cruelty, pure destruction. Where the man had a conscience that restrained the creature's hungers, this new host had no conscience at all, and so nothing restrained the offspring's darkness. Where the man and the creature had turned their power toward protection, this new pairing turned its power toward slaughter, toward chaos, toward killing for the sheer joy of it. It was everything the man and the creature might have been if they had given in fully to the darkness. It was the monster they had chosen not to become, and it was terrifying. And here, softly, is the fascinating thing. Because faced with this new horror, this pure and unrestrained evil, the man and the creature did something revealing. They opposed it. They fought against it. This dark offspring, this creature of pure malice, became their enemy, and they set themselves against it to protect the innocent from its slaughter. And in doing so, they revealed how far they had come and how much good was truly in them. Because when confronted with what they might have been, with the pure monster they had chosen not to become, they were horrified by it, and they fought it, and they stood against it on the side of the innocent. They looked at their own dark reflection, at the monster their own darkness could have made, and they rejected it, opposed it, fought to stop it. And that opposition proved, more than anything, that they had truly chosen the better path. There is something profound in that contrast, softly, worth resting on gently, because the dark offspring exists, in the story, precisely to show us what the man and the creature are not. It is the road not taken, the monster not become, the darkness not surrendered to. And by placing the two side by side, the story reveals the truth about the man and the creature, that they are not, in fact, monsters, not truly, however monstrous they may appear. Because a real monster looks like the dark offspring, pure malice, unrestrained cruelty, killing for joy. And the man and the creature are not that. They have a conscience. They protect the innocent. They are horrified by pure evil and fight against it. They are, for all their darkness, for all their fangs and their fury, fundamentally on the side of good. And it takes seeing the real monster, the dark offspring, to fully understand that. The contrast reveals the truth. Next to true evil, the man and the creature are revealed for what they really are. Not monsters, protectors. Dark and violent and frightening, yes, but protectors, standing against the very darkness they might have become. Let's rest a moment on the deep meaning of that, softly, worth carrying gently towards sleep, because it speaks to one of the most important truths there is about the difference between having darkness in you and being ruled by it. The man and the creature had darkness in them, plenty of it, the creature's alien hungers, the man's rage and bitterness. But they were not ruled by that darkness. They restrained it, directed it, chose again and again not to let it make them into pure monsters. And the dark offspring shows us what it looks like when darkness is not restrained, when it rules completely, when there is no conscience to hold it back. The difference between the two is not whether they have darkness. Both do. The difference is whether they master it or are mastered by it. And the man and the creature, for all their struggles, master theirs. They keep the conscience, the restraint, the choice to protect rather than destroy. And in doing so, they prove that darkness within does not have to mean darkness triumphant, that even a being made of shadow and hunger and pain can choose, through the exercise of conscience and will, to be a protector rather than a monster. That is the deepest lesson of the contrast. Not the absence of darkness, but its mastery. Not purity, but the choice, made again and again, to turn even our darkness toward the good. Let's drift, softly, into a question that sits at the very center of his story, before we rest in the quiet of the night, because it is worth resting on gently. It is the question of what actually makes a monster. Because he looks like a monster, perhaps more than almost any other figure in these stories, he has the appearance of a nightmare, all teeth and claws and darkness, a shape designed to frighten. And yet, as we have seen, he is, beneath that shape, something quite different. A wounded soul, a protector, a being capable of love and loyalty and sacrifice. And that gap between his monstrous appearance and his far gentler soul points at one of the deepest truths in his whole story. Because what makes a monster, softly, is not appearance. It is not teeth or claws or a frightening shape. A monster is defined by what it does, by how it treats others, by whether it protects or preys, whether it loves or only consumes. And by that measure, the thing that looks most like a monster in his story is often not the real monster at all. Remember the dark offspring, the creature of pure malice bonded to a soul without conscience. That being might look, in some ways, similar, but it is a true monster because it preys, it slaughters, it cares for nothing but its own cruelty. And the man and the creature, who look just as frightening, are not monsters, because they protect, they love, they care, beneath their terrifying shape. The appearance is the same, the soul is entirely different, and it is the soul, not the appearance, that makes the monster. There is a deep and gentle wisdom in that, softly, worth resting on gently, one that reaches far beyond his strange story. Because we so often judge by appearances, recoil from what looks frightening, assume that a monstrous exterior means a monstrous soul. And his story is a quiet rebuke to that assumption. It asks us to look past the frightening surface, to the soul beneath, to judge not by what a thing looks like, but by what it does, how it treats others, what it truly is at its core. The most frightening-looking being in the story turns out to be, beneath the teeth, a wounded and loving soul. And the real monsters, in these stories and in life, often do not look like monsters at all. They may look perfectly ordinary, even pleasant, while doing monstrous things. Appearance and reality do not match. And his story teaches us to see past the one to the other, to look for the soul beneath the surface, to understand that what makes a monster is never how it looks, but always how it loves, or fails to love. And there is something deeply hopeful and deeply kind in that lesson, softly, worth carrying gently towards sleep, because it means that no one is a monster simply for looking like one, for being different, for being frightening on the surface. It means that the outcast, the strange one, the one everyone recoils from, may carry, beneath their frightening exterior, a soul as gentle and loving and worthy as any other. It means that we should be slow to judge, slow to recoil, slow to assume that a frightening surface means a frightening heart. The man and the creature were judged monsters by nearly everyone, feared and rejected for their appearance. And beneath that appearance, they were two of the most loving and loyal souls in all of these stories. And there is a deep kindness in a story that asks us to see that, to look past the surface to the soul, to remember that the ones who look most like monsters are often the ones most in need of and most capable of love. Let's drift, softly, for a while, into the quiet of the city at night, because it is a peaceful thing to rest on as the night grows late, and because the two lonely souls of our story move through exactly this kind of night, together. Picture the great city, gently, as sleep draws nearer, the rain falling soft and steady over the towers and the streets, the lights of the tall buildings glowing through the wet dark, the streets below quiet now, glistening under the lamps. The whole vast place hushed, settling into the deep quiet of the late hours. And somewhere in that quiet dark, softly, the two lonely souls move together, watching over the sleeping city. And there is something worth resting on in that image, gently, because it captures the deepest thing about them. They are together. After all their loneliness, all their rejection, all their long solitude, they are, at last, not alone. They move through the night side by side, or rather, joined into one, sharing the darkness, sharing the watch, sharing the strange and quiet companionship of two beings who have finally found each other. And there is a deep peace in that, even in so dark a story. The peace of no longer being alone. The quiet comfort of having someone with you in the dark. Because that, in the end, softly, is what they found. A kind of home. Not a place, but a person. Not a house, but a bond. Because home, real home, is not always a location. Sometimes it is simply the presence of someone who wants you, who accepts you, who is there with you in the dark. The man and the creature had each been homeless, in the deepest sense, cast out, rejected, belonging nowhere. And they found their home not in any place, but in each other. Each became the other's home, the other's belonging, the other's safe harbor in a world that had rejected them both. And there is something profoundly comforting in that idea, worth resting on gently as you drift. That home is not always a place we go, but sometimes a person we find. That belonging is not always about fitting into the world, but about finding the one who fits with us. That even those who belong nowhere, who are cast out by everyone, can find a home, at last, in each other. Let that gentle thought settle over you now, softly, as the rain falls and the city sleeps. The idea of finding home, not in a place, but in a bond, of no longer being alone, of having someone with you in the dark, someone who wants you, accepts you, stays with you, so that wherever you are home, because they are there. The two lonely souls found that, and there is a deep and quiet comfort in it, a warmth at the heart of even this dark story, that is a gentle and soothing thing to carry down with you into sleep. You are not alone. You are home. You are held, safe, in the quiet of the night. Let's drift, now, into why this figure resonates with so many people so deeply, softly, because it is worth understanding, and it reveals what his story is truly about beneath all the teeth and the darkness. Because he is, by many measures, one of the most beloved figures in all of these stories, a creature that people connect with far more deeply than his frightening appearance would suggest. And the question of why is worth resting on gently. Part of it, softly, is simply the appeal of the outsider, the misfit, the one who does not belong. Because he is, at his core, an outcast, cast out by his own kind for being different, rejected by the hero he loved, broken, lonely, unwanted, and almost everyone, somewhere inside, knows what that feels like. To not fit in, to be different, to be rejected, or lonely, or made to feel unwanted. And there is something enormously appealing in a figure who embodies that outsider status, and yet finds, in the end, connection, belonging, purpose. He is the outcast who found a home, the rejected one who found someone who wanted him, the lonely creature who finally, after everything, was no longer alone. And that speaks powerfully to everyone who has ever felt like an outsider, which is to say, almost everyone. Part of it, softly, is the theme of the bond itself, of the deep and complete connection between the man and the creature. Because that bond, for all its darkness, represents something we all long for: the end of loneliness, the finding of a true partner, someone who understands you completely, who is always there, who accepts you exactly as you are, darkness and all. The man and the creature accept each other totally. The creature does not judge the man's bitterness. The man does not recoil from the creature's alien nature. They accept each other completely, wholly, and in that total acceptance, they find the thing everyone longs for: to be fully known and fully accepted, to be loved not despite your flaws and your darkness, but along with them, wholly and without reservation. And there is something deeply moving in that, in the image of two beings who accept each other so completely, who have found in each other the total acceptance and companionship that eases the deepest loneliness of all. And part of it, softly, the deepest part, is that his story is ultimately one of redemption, of transformation, of the possibility of becoming better than your wounds. Because he begins as an outcast, a reject, a broken and bitter thing bent on revenge, and he becomes a protector, a guardian, a being who turns his darkness toward the defense of the innocent. His story is the story of a fall and a rising, of a wounded soul that could have become a monster and chose, instead, to become something better. And that is one of the most hopeful and most beloved of all story shapes: the redemption of the fallen, the turning of darkness toward light, the proof that even the most broken and frightening among us can find purpose, connection, and a kind of goodness. People love him because his story tells them that they, too, can be more than their wounds, that rejection and pain and darkness do not have to be the end, that even an outcast, even a monster, even a broken and bitter soul can find connection and purpose and redemption if only they choose it, and if only they find the right one to share the journey with. There is real value in a figure like that, softly, worth resting on gently, because he teaches us not to judge by appearances, to look past the frightening surface to the wounded and longing soul beneath. He teaches us that the ones who seem most monstrous are often the most hurt, the most lonely, the most desperate for the very connection they seem to threaten. He teaches us that darkness within can be mastered, turned toward good, made into a source of protection rather than destruction. And he teaches us, above all, about the power of connection, of acceptance, of no longer being alone, to heal even the deepest wounds and redeem even the most broken souls. His is a frightening face over a tender heart, a monster's shape over a story of loneliness and love and redemption. And that is why, of all the frightening figures in all of these stories, this one, the living darkness from the stars, is one that people do not just fear, but genuinely love. Because they see, beneath the teeth and the fury, a story that is really about the thing we all long for most: to be accepted completely, to belong at last, to no longer, ever again, be alone. Let's begin, now, softly, to draw the threads of this strange and tender story together as the night grows deep and sleep draws very near. Because we have traveled a long way tonight through the whole story of the living darkness and the broken man, and it is worth gathering it up, gently, one last time. We began with the charming truth that this frightening figure started life as a fan's idea for a costume, and the strange revelation that the costume was alive. And then we drifted far out among the stars, to the creature's true origin, the gentle outcast cast out by a race of conquerors for wanting a true bond rather than a conquest. We followed him to Earth, to his first great love and his first great heartbreak, the bright hero who rejected him and cast him off, and the deep wound that rejection left. We found the second lonely soul, the broken and bitter man, and watched two wounded creatures who both felt wronged by the same hero find each other and bond and become a we. We drifted into the strange psychology of two beings sharing one body, the deep togetherness and the constant negotiation. We saw why they were, at first, so terrifying an enemy. The intimacy of the old bond turned to the power to wound. We watched them turn, slowly, from villains into protectors, choosing to guard the innocent rather than pursue revenge. And we saw, in the dark contrast of the pure monster their own darkness could have made, exactly how much good they had truly chosen. And underneath all of it, softly, one deep and tender truth, that this frightening figure was never really a monster. He was two lonely souls, an outcast creature and a broken man, each rejected, each wounded, each desperate for the one thing they had never had: to be accepted, to belong, to no longer be alone. And they found it in each other. Two halves that had each been cast aside, joining into a single whole, and finding, in that joining, the end of the loneliness that had defined them both. That is the true story beneath the teeth and the fury. Not a tale of a monster, but a love story. A strange and dark one, but a love story all the same. The story of two lonely things who found each other and decided they no longer had to be alone. So let the whole strange story go now, softly, and let yourself drift the rest of the way down into sleep. The rain is falling now, soft and steady, over the great dark city, sliding down the windows, glazing the empty streets, hushing the whole restless place into quiet. Somewhere out there in the wet dark, the two lonely souls move through the night together, no longer alone, watching over the sleeping city, guarding, in their own dark way, the very people the world forgot. It is a strange thing, their bond, but it is, in the end, a tender one. Two who found each other in the dark. And you can rest now, too, wherever you are, safe and warm and watched over, held gently in the quiet of the night. Whatever moves through the story, it cannot reach you here. No one needs saving tonight, least of all you. You are safe. You are not alone. You are allowed to let go. Sleep well, dreamer. The rain is still falling, soft and steady, over the quiet, glowing city. The two lonely souls keep their watch in the dark, together, no longer alone. And there is a strange, gentle peace in that, even now. The story will keep unspooling, softly, in the rain and the shadow, whether you are awake to follow it or not. And that is exactly as it should be. And whenever you are ready, on whatever quiet night you find your way back here, we will drift through another story together, softly, in the dark. There is no hurry at all. There never is. Rest now. You are safe. Sleep well.